Alright, hello everyone and welcome to NFL Discussion. I'm your host and NFL enthusiast Doug. In today's episode I'm going to be discussing week 13 of the 2022 NFL season. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about four teams from the Sunday slate of action, that being the 49ers, Packers, Ravens, and Giants. And it was certainly an eventful day for those teams. And with that, we'll go ahead and get right into the action, starting with the 49ers. So, Jimmy Garoppolo only threw 4 passes in the game before he got carted to the locker room, and it was later on revealed that he had broken his foot and he will now miss the remainder of the season. So what does this injury mean for the 49ers and also for their spots in the playoffs? Well, their backup is a guy by the name of Brock Purdy, and when Brock took over for Garoppolo, he engineered a couple of touchdown drives and threw an interception. Ultimately, he led the 49ers to a quality win over a red-hot Dolphins team that had entered the game on a 5-game win streak. The 49ers are now going to have to adjust for a long-term without Garoppolo, and that likely starts by leaning on Purdy. Remember, their original starter week 1, Trey Lance, broke his ankle in week 2, so he was lost for a year, thus putting Garoppolo back under center. And even though Brock Purdy, he did look sharp in the preseason, which is how he beat out Nate Sudfeld for the third string job, he's still an inexperienced rookie who nearly went undrafted, earning the Mr. Irrelevant label that goes to the final pick in each draft class. On a positive note, Purdy has probably the best supporting cast a young single color can ask for on both sides of the ball. You look on offense, he gets to throw the ball and hand the ball off to Christian McCaffrey and throw the ball to George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and even Brandon Ayuk, who has come along well in his third season. Now, defensively, San Francisco came into the Week 13 with the fewest points and yards allowed, and typically Kyle Shanahan emphasizes the run game, even though Elijah Mitchell is on injured reserve. Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason should be able to handle the majority of the rushing workload for the offense that ranked 10th in total carries before or going into Sunday's game. They also have Trevion Davis-Price, Devin Coleman, who's on the practice squad, and even Deebo Samuel can pitch in some and handle some carries on the ground. In other words, Purdy won't have to carry the 49ers on his own to the finish line. He just needs to play within himself, get the ball to his playmakers, and avoid turnovers that could certainly swing a game the wrong way. Which would take some pressure off a stout defense. And with that formula, San Francisco still has a path to 10 wins and a playoff spot. But that said, though, the Super Bowl buzz surrounding this team has probably evaporated. If the 49ers reach the playoff, Purdy will have to make plays in the passing game to match up with some of the better teams across the league, which could be too much to ask for a player who will likely be starting his first regular season game next week. But yeah, it is a shame that things had to end this way for the 49ers. But they are set up well, and I guess it'll be interesting to see how things play out from there. Packers. So they got a win over the Bears, which should postpone any thoughts about shutting Aaron Rodgers down for now. And I guess, and other good news coming out of that, Aaron Rodgers still owns the Bears. Despite the Packers falling behind in the second quarter, they tightened up on defense and scored on 18 unanswered points to win the game 28-19. So according to Tom Pelissero from NFL Network, the Packers and Rodgers are going to work together on whether or not to insert Jordan Love into the lineup if the team is mathematically eliminated from the postseason. Since October, Rodgers has played with a fractured right thumb, and he also suffered a rib injury, which led to an early exit in that game against the Eagles last week. Even though his body is a bit banged up, Rodgers plans to continue to gut it out with his team, and he does have a good reason for doing so. They still have an outside chance to make the playoffs, and he can use the remaining weeks of the season to strengthen his rapport with Christian Watson, who has 15 catches for 213 yards and 7 touchdowns since week 10. On Sunday, the Bears improved to 5-8 heading into a bye week. Coming out of the bye, they play the Rams, and then they have a couple more home games against the Vikings and Lions. So as of now, going into the bye, they still have something to play for in the final 2 months of the season. Ravens. Lamar Jackson is injured, but Tyler Huntley might be equipped to keep the Ravens' playoff hopes alive. So kind of a similar situation to the 49ers, except Lamar Jackson is not expected to be out for the rest of the year. He did go into the blue tent and then pretty much didn't return in the game, which put Tyler Huntley into the starting role. Now, he did struggle for much of the game, but he did lead the Ravens downfield for a game-winning drive, scoring on a 2-yard run with just 28 seconds left in regulation, giving Baltimore a 10-9 win over the Broncos. After the game, John Harbaugh suggested that Jackson's injury won't sideline for the season, but rather days or weeks. Per Ian Rappaport from NFL Network, Jackson sprained his knee, but he'll still get an MRI and some other exams to better determine a prognostics, better figure out the injury and get a better timeline of how long he'll be sidelined. In the meantime, Baltimore will turn to Huntley, who started 4 games in Jackson's absence last year. Now, Huntley isn't as polished or established as Jackson, but he could certainly mimic him with his rushing ability. Keep in mind that Jackson has only averaged 193.7 passing yards over his last 3 games, completing less than 55% of his throws in 2 of those contests and throwing for 2 touchdowns and an interception in that stretch. So with the way Jackson's been playing in the past few weeks, the Ravens probably won't see too much of a drop-off between him and Huntley in the passing game. And because of the run-heavy nature of Baltimore's offense, Huntley can lean on that and possibly lead Baltimore to some wins using his mobility and timely passes to Mark Andrews and Demarcus Robinson. So realistically speaking, still the biggest issue with the Ravens is just a lack of weapons in the passing game. And if the Ravens find themselves in games where they have to throw the ball, they could be in trouble, regardless if it's Jackson or Huntley. But they're still in decent shape even with this setback with Jackson's injury. Giants. So they tied with the Commanders in this game, but they can't linger on that. They have to look ahead because up next is possibly their biggest game of the season. So the Giants started the season 6-1, and they kind of faded a bit down the middle of the season, which has set them up for a tough stretch with 3 of the remaining 5 games against opponents in their division, the NFC East. The Giants, they had a chance to gain some separation from the Commanders, but instead settled for a tie when their kicker missed a field goal to beat Washington in overtime. Though the Giants were able to halt the win streak of the Commanders, they're still in a tough spot with the Eagles next on their schedule, and Washington heading into a bye. If Big Blue loses to Philadelphia, that drops them to 7-5-1, which would match Washington's record, and those 2 teams they face each other in Week 15, and if Big Blue loses, that makes another big matchup between these 2 teams. Also, Chase Young, the Pro Bowl edge rusher for the Commanders, he's set to return for that game per ESPN's Chris Mortensen. So in the AFC East, every team has at least 7 wins, with the Eagles having the best record league-wide at 11-1. They got a nice win over the Titans, with 3 of their last 4 games on the road against Washington, Minnesota, and Philadelphia. The Giants can do themselves a huge favor in a playoff push by pulling the upset over the Eagles next week. Easier said than done, but certainly the Giants have found themselves in an interesting spot. I mean, they have outperformed expectations. I still think that it's likely they get a playoff spot, but I don't know if they're advancing past the first round, but they've done well for themselves in year 1. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode of NFL Discussion. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that like button down below.